The racist flight attendant kicked out a black soldier in first class, and bitterly regretted it. Flight 457, a trip between Paris and New York, seemed to be one of those regular flights that went unnoticed in the daily lives of frequent travelers. This type of flight was often long and monotonous, an Atlantic crossing that, although comfortable, did not bring spectacular events or surprises. But on board this plane, something bigger was going to happen, something that was going to shake up the certainties of some and irreversibly transform the lives of several passengers. Particularly that of Marie, a young flight attendant whose arrogance and certainty of her place in the world would soon come up against a much more complex and nuanced reality. Marie was 26 years old. She had been working in aviation for 3 years, an experience that had shaped her and allowed her to understand the unwritten rules of this world a little too well. This world where money and power dictated the behavior of passengers, where the most fortunate demanded not only to be served, but to be admired and honored. She had gotten used to it, and had even learned to play this subtle game, stepping aside when necessary, making herself invisible to those who did not correspond to her image of ideal client. She knew that, in this hushed world of luxury and appearance, every gesture had to be perfectly measured.
Every smile, every movement, every word.
Marie knew how to attract and maintain the attention of influential passengers, and how to meet the demands of those occupying the most prestigious seats. The first classes of transatlantic flights were elite places, spaces reserved for those who could afford these coveted seats. CEOs, celebrities, real estate moguls, business leaders and politicians. Marie had learned to recognize the faces of these powerful personalities. Those who had the ability to dictate their will and make everything, even the invisible, bend to their desires. But that day, a scene would unfold in that first class that would turn everything upside down, a scene that would challenge Marie's expectations and her view of the world. As she entered the cabin to carry out the usual checks before takeoff, her gaze fell on an unexpected silhouette. A black woman, sitting calmly in her seat, seemingly disconnected from the hustle and bustle in the cabin. Marie stopped for a moment. Something was wrong. The appearance of the passenger was not that of a person who belonged to this world of luxury and pageantry. The woman was dressed in an impeccable military uniform. Her gaze was calm, resolute, but above all, she seemed to exude a natural authority that contradicted everything Marie thought she knew about first-class passengers. She did not wear the expensive perfume of the elites, nor the extravagant clothing usually found among the other occupants of the section. No, she seemed to be in another world. A world that Marie did not understand. The soldier, Alima Cohn, was not there to seduce or impress. She was there for a reason that, at that moment, escaped Marie. But what was most striking was his presence. She didn't seem intimidated by the luxurious surroundings. No, it was rather Marie who, in a moment of hesitation, suddenly felt confronted with something she had not anticipated. She approached Alima, her gaze moving from the soldier's impeccable uniform to her determined face. "Excuse me, mademoiselle," Marie said, trying to mask the contempt that crept into her voice despite herself. "But I think you are in the wrong place." She added in a cold tone, "This section is reserved for first-class passengers." Alima, who had been immersed in thought, looked up and met Marie's gaze. That look. It wasn't defiant, but it wasn't submissive either. It was a calm look, that of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why she was there. "No, I'm in the right place," she replied in a calm but firm voice. "I have a ticket for this seat." Marie, taken by surprise, felt a slight discomfort, but this discomfort only lasted a moment. She wasn't ready to admit that she might have been wrong. No, this woman could not belong to this world. It just didn't make sense to her.
I assure you that you must move.
Perhaps there was a mistake in the reservation, she insisted, a little more sharply this time. But Alima, like an unshakable mountain, did not move an inch. "I assure you that is not the case. My ticket is valid." His voice betrayed no nervousness, no hesitation. She seemed perfectly at home, despite the dismissive attitude that was becoming more and more evident around her. This contrast destabilized Marie. The hostess, embarrassed by the situation and more determined than ever to impose the order she knew, turned to the purser, an older and experienced man, but who seemed not to understand the urgency of the situation. He walked towards them, and before he could even say anything, Alima spoke directly to him, in a calm but authoritative manner.
Please check my information.
You will find that everything is in order. The purser, after consulting the computer, confirmed that soldier Alima Cohn had indeed reserved her seat in first class, and that everything was in order. But by then it was already too late for Marie. His judgment had been made, and the decision to humiliate Alima seemed irremediable. The tension that had settled in the air was not only the result of confrontation, it was an internal awareness that was beginning to sprout within Marie. She felt unsettled, a small voice whispering to her that something was wrong with her behavior. But she wasn't ready to listen to him. She had acted out of habit, influenced by unconscious stereotypes, those ingrained ideas that society had sown in her, prejudices that she had never questioned. The flight stretched over several hours, and the passengers settled into the routine of the trip. The flight attendants, while remaining attentive to their tasks, tried to dissipate the electric atmosphere. But as the hours passed, Marie often found herself lost in thought. The beating of her heart rang in her ears, accompanied by an inner voice that questioned her. Why this insistence? Why had she felt the need to put a woman who seemed out of her world back into place, especially when Alima's appearance was so far from the norm she had constructed in her mind? A feeling of uneasiness was gradually creeping into her, a feeling of guilt that she preferred to ignore, but which was becoming more and more difficult to deny. The passengers had relaxed, some were sleeping, others were listening to music or chatting in low voices. Marie had resumed her service, trying to put aside the thoughts that troubled her. It was then that, a few hours before landing, the situation took an unexpected turn. A discreet call was made from the cockpit, addressed directly to Marie. The tone was formal, but urgent. She heard her name, followed by a request, "Bring in passenger Cohn." A sentence which, in the context of this theft, did not mean much to Marie. But the moment she heard the name, an involuntary shiver ran down her spine. She instinctively turned towards the soldier's seat. Alima was still there, sitting quietly, as if waiting for something bigger than this flight. A new uneasiness took hold of Marie. What did that mean? Why call her to the front of the plane? These thoughts raced through her head as she headed towards where the soldier was likely going. But before she arrived, a man in military uniform stood up from a seat at the back of the aisle. The man, tall and imposing, wore the military uniform with a confidence that left no doubt about his rank. He walked towards Marie with measured steps, his piercing gaze fixed on the young hostess. "Marie," he said in a deep voice, "we need to talk. Right now." The officer's tone left no room for negotiation. The air around him suddenly seemed denser. The stewardess, although accustomed to the strong personalities of the passengers in first class, felt a shiver of apprehension. He stopped a few steps from her and fixed her with a piercing gaze, a palpable coldness in his eyes. "You don't realize who you kicked out of first class, do you?" Marie froze, taken aback, but the man didn't give her time to react. "Alima Cohn is a war heroine," he continued, his face impassive, his gaze as icy as ever. "She saved lives, many lives, in the field. And today she is here on an important mission with military officials in New York." At these words, an overwhelming feeling of shame invaded Marie. She didn't even have time to think. The name Alima Cohn echoed in her mind, and the truth hit her like a shock wave. This woman whom she had judged by her appearance and her uniform, this black soldier, was not just an ordinary passenger. She was respected beyond borders, a woman whose courage and dignity were worth far more than the arrogance of an overconfident flight attendant. A few minutes after the man spoke, the news circulated in the cabin.
Murmurs espreadamon de passengers.
Those who had observed the exchange suddenly understood the situation. Marie immediately felt exposed, as if all eyes were on her. The humiliation that overwhelmed her was immense, and she realized to what extent she had let herself be carried away by preconceived ideas, which she had never sought to question. Every whisper, every look seemed to reflect back to her the image of her own arrogance. When the plane finally landed, Alima slowly returned to her seat, as dignified and calm as ever, without showing the slightest sign of resentment. Marie stood there for a moment, as if petrified. She knew she should apologize, but pride kept her from doing so immediately. It took a few minutes, but Marie finally got up, with a heavy heart, and walked towards Alima's seat. The hostess knelt before her, her face red with shame. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her words sounding weak against the intensity of the moment. I should never have treated you like that. It was unacceptable." Her eyes searched for a sign of reconciliation, but what she didn't know was that this reconciliation could only come from her own inner work. Alima looked at her calmly, without anger. His voice was soft, but carried a wisdom born from many trials. "The truth is, I didn't need your forgiveness," she replied, almost with a hint of sadness in her voice. "But maybe you needed it for yourself." Marie, her eyes lowered, understood then that the lesson she had just learned would be much more than a simple reprimand. It was a turning point in her life, a call to question the beliefs and judgments that guided her. She walked away, not only scarred by her mistakes, but with the certainty that she would never again judge someone based on their appearance, their uniform, or their skin color.